When World War I erupted in 1914, President Woodrow Wilson pledged neutrality for the United States, a position that the vast majority of Americans favored. The U-boat was the Germans' most formidable naval weapon, a military submarine far more sophisticated than those built by other nations at the time. The typical U-boat was 214 feet long, carried 35 men and 12 torpedoes, and could travel underwater for about 2 hours at a time. Germany could easily hold its own, but something caused America to join the war, something most Americans were never told about.
With British Prime Minister Lloyd George up against a wall, Lionel Rothschild and the Jewish Zionists offered the British a deal they couldn't refuse. "We'll bring the United States into the war as your ally and win the war for you," they said, "if you'll promise us Palestine." In April of 1917, President Wilson got the green light and declared war on Germany. In return, the British government wrote the famous Balfour Declaration and addressed it to none other than Lord Lionel Rothschild. The declaration promised Palestine and Israel to the Rothschild Zionists.
Benjamin H. Friedman was a successful Jewish businessman who was at one time the principal owner of the Woodbury Soap Company. He spent the great preponderance of his considerable fortune, at least $2.5 million, exposing the tyranny which he believed had enveloped the United States.
World War I broke out in the summer of 1914. Now that war was waged on one side by Great Britain, France, and Russia, and on the other side by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. Within 2 years, Germany had won that war. Not alone won it nominally, but won it actually. The German submarines, which were a surprise to the world, had swept all the convoys from the Atlantic Ocean, and Great Britain stood there without ammunition for her soldiers, stood there with 1 week's food supply facing her, and after that, starvation. At that time, the French army had mutinied. They lost 600,000 of the flower of the French youth in the defense of Verdun on the Somme. The Russian army was defecting. They were picking up their toys and going home. They didn't want to play war anymore. They didn't like the Tsar. And the Italian army had collapsed. Now, Germany, not a shot had been fired on the German soil. Not an enemy soldier had crossed the border into Germany. And yet, here was Germany offering England peace terms. They offered England a negotiated peace on what the lawyers call a status quo ante basis. That means let's call the war off and let everything be as it was before the war started. Well, England in the summer of 1916 was considering that seriously. They had no choice. It was either accepting this negotiated peace that Germany was magnanimously offering them, or going on with the war and being totally defeated. While that was going on, the Zionists in London went to the British War Cabinet and they said, "Look here, you can yet win this war. You don't have to give up. You don't have to accept a negotiated peace offered to you now by Germany. You can win this war if the United States will come in as your ally." The United States was not in the war at that time. We were fresh, we were young, we were rich, we were powerful. And they told England, "We will guarantee to bring the United States into the war as your ally, to fight with you on your side, if you will promise us Palestine after you win the war." In other words, they made this deal. We will get the United States into this war as your ally. The price you must pay us is Palestine after you have won the war and defeated Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey.
The Balfour Declaration, a 1917 letter from then UK Foreign Secretary Lord Arthur Balfour, pledging Britain's support for the establishment of a home for Jewish people in Palestine. Israel's National Archives are full of correspondences around that promise, including letters of protest from Palestinian leaders at the time. 100 years after the fact, the Palestinian Authority says they'll sue Britain's government in an international court.
Now, England had as much right to promise Palestine to anybody as the United States would have to promise Japan to Ireland for any reason whatsoever. It's absolutely absurd that Great Britain, that never had any connection or any interest or any right in what is known as Palestine, should offer it as coin of the realm to pay the Zionists for bringing the United States into the war. However, they made that promise in October of 1960.
Well, I'm here with thousands of others to say that Britain is the cause of all of this disaster. Britain, on behalf of one people, promised to a second people the land which belonged to a third people in the Balfour Declaration almost 100 years ago. Britain is therefore jointly and severally responsible for all of the suffering that has occurred since.
They went to England and they made this deal. At that time, everything changed, like the traffic light that changes from red to green, where the newspapers had been all pro-German, where they'd been telling the people the difficulties that Germany was having fighting Great Britain commercially and in other respects. All of a sudden, the Germans were no good. They were villains. They were Huns. They were shooting Red Cross nurses. They were cutting off babies' hands, and they were no good. Well, shortly after that, Mr. Wilson declared war on Germany. We were suckered into that war merely so that the Zionists of the world could obtain Palestine. Now, that is something that the people in the United States have never been told. They never knew why we went into World War I. Now, what happened? After we got into the war, the Zionists went to Great Britain and they said, well, we performed our part of the agreement. Let's have something in writing that shows that you are going to keep your bargain and give us Palestine after you win the war, because they didn't know whether the war would last another year or another 10 years. So they started to work out a receipt. The receipt took the form of a letter, and it was worded in very cryptic language so that the world at large wouldn't know what it was all about. And that was called the Balfour Declaration.
1817, Lord Allenby conquered the Holy Land, and the Jews were promised a national home in Palestine by the Earl of Balfour, a policy endorsed by Woodrow Wilson and by the League of Nations, which made Palestine a British mandate.
The Balfour Declaration was merely Great Britain's promise to pay the Zionists what they had agreed upon as a consideration for getting the United States into the war. The United States crushed Germany. We went in there, and it's history, you know what happened. Now, when the war was ended, and the Germans went to Paris, to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, there were 117 Jews there as a delegation representing the Jews, headed by Bernard Baruch. I was there, I ought to know. The Jews at that peace conference, when they were cutting up Germany and parceling out Europe to all these nations that claimed a right to a certain part of European territory, the Jews said, how about Palestine for us? And they produced, for the first time, to the knowledge of Germans, this Balfour Declaration. So the Germans, for the first time, realized, oh, that was the game. That's why the United States came into the war. And the Germans for the first time realized that they were defeated. They suffered this terrific reparations that was slapped onto them because the Zionists wanted Palestine, and they were determined to get it at any cost.
The Balfour Declaration was signed on behalf of the British government and mentions Lord Rothschild by name, requesting that he bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. The Rothschild prominence in this historic situation cannot be understated, especially since it is the Rothschild family that eventually designed and financed the Knesset, Israel's parliament, including the pyramid with the eye and all the other occult symbology. The Rothschild family descended from Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who was born in what is now Frankfurt, Germany, and went on to establish a huge international banking empire. Through his 5 sons, Mayer Amschel Rothschild expanded his banking fortune, with his 5 sons each stationed at one of the major European financial centers: Frankfurt, London, Naples, Vienna, and Paris. In the 19th century, the Rothschild family were at the height of their powers, and they utilized this power by effecting some very significant events in human history in order to profit greatly from it. That said, you will not find a single mention of the name Rothschild in the Forbes list of 500 wealthiest people on earth, but they are clearly the richest family on earth, as well as one of the most corrupt.
Right. New World Order, depopulation,
listen, who are you?
genocide.
Who are you televising for?
We just want to let you know the New World Order has no legitimacy.
and that we as a people are not afraid, and we are waking up to the robber barons and the big banksters who are looting this economy with the Federal Reserve.
Well,
I mean, the Rothschilds family did start the federal, they divided Europe first, took over Europe, Napoleon.
Don't exaggerate.
My name is Robert SEPEHR. I'm an author and anthropologist, and would like to invite you to join me in awakening from a long amnesia. Species with Amnesia, Our Forgotten History. Gods with Amnesia, Subterranean Worlds of Inner Earth. The Occult Secrets of Vril. And 1666, Redemption Through Sin. I would like to thank my subscribers who share my posts, as I rely on word of mouth, and I appreciate all of the positive feedback, reviews on my books, and I thank you very much for listening.